all the conversations in the group about this end up in two buckets. One, either whatever thing you're looking at in the United States, it's worse in Europe based on like literally a tweet. Or actually, this weird thing that looks terrible is actually amazing, actually. You just don't get it. We never land in the bucket of like, well, that kind of does suck in the US. It could do a better job of it. Like that is never the answer to the conversation. It's always one of the other two.
The moment you start saying that is like we're going to solve that thing, I agree with Antonio. I just think that the societal breakdown would happen. It's like the worst science fiction you could think of is when basically people don't die.
When Spindle sells for a lot of money or goes public, what you do next? Do you get off of Twitter and the spectacle and then go chill in a boat?
Of course.
Or do you?
Antonio claims that he's gonna be completely offline after he makes
completely,
it.
but definitely not like I am now. Yeah, definitely.
You're gonna be like Elon, man. You're gonna be saying you're gonna.
I'll do. Look, Erik, I'll promise you one MOZ episode from my little house built out of stone in northern Spain somewhere, and then that's it. And then I'm out forever. That'll be my last experience. That's it. My network of spies said you were off skiing.
I'm back from skiing. I'm dialed in at work.
I mean, you've had a big weekend.
Yeah, frames. Had a little bit of a moment in the sun.
Antonio, Dan is too modest about his accomplishment with frames. Why don't you?
Yeah, you got to pump this. I mean, we're in crypto here. You got to sell it like it's a used Cadillac. I can't introduce your product. You have to go do it first.
All right, Dan, why don't you say what it is, and then Antonio will say why he thinks it's special.
Yeah, so Team launched on Friday because that's what we do with Farcasters. We feature Fridays, go into the weekend with new features. But we launched something called Frames, which for those who are old enough to have experienced the Facebook app platform is a redux on Facebook apps, but this time in a mobile app. Something looks more like Twitter. Basically, it's an image with a few buttons, but there's interactivity within a cast, which for those who don't use Farcaster, it's kind of like a tweet. So the simplest way to think about it is a poll on Twitter is like a frame. But on Twitter, the only thing you can do is do a poll, and it's somewhat boring. And Ayla and others use polls a lot.
Ayla's polls are pretty good. I have to
say. Michelle Chandler is pretty famous for using polls. Like it's a little bit of performance.
Caused my soul to shrink. I literally have just recoiled from some of Ayla's polls.
Anyways, so that is a type of interactivity within a tweet, but that's it. And Twitter actually had a bunch of this stuff a few years ago when they were, in theory, working on their developer platform again, and then Elon came in and kind of said, none of this is important. But the thing that's always been a deal breaker is, one, you can do a poll in the app, but developers can't play around with that canvas. And two, and this even happened in the case of Facebook, and Antonio, you can actually tell us the history because you were there during this transition, is it kind of didn't, the Facebook app era never made the transition to mobile. And there was so much money to be made from mobile app install ads that Facebook didn't have to worry about apps on their platform anymore. They just made money from ads. But I think there's a ton of latent demand. And I think what we saw over the weekend, 100 plus people, I think, have built a frame. They had a hackathon in New York. There's completely grassroots. 50 plus people were building frames. But basically, it's these little mini apps within a feed. And it's expressivity for developers where instead of having to build their own mobile app and convince someone else to download the mobile app, which no one's going to actually go do, you can cater to an audience of people who haven't a mobile app installed, in this case, Warpcast, and they don't have to do anything extra work. They can just interact with your app right from the feed. And so people have come up with some pretty interesting ones. Obviously, someone put Doom in it, which is like a pretty classic thing that engineers show how good they are. It's like, okay, new developer primitive, can it run Doom? There's actually a subreddit for this. And then I think, the more crypto native thing is people started playing around with, I don't have a crypto wallet embedded in this frame, but I can use the kind of identity primitive for Farcaster to kind of as a proxy mint an NFT, which if you don't care about NFTs, maybe you don't care, but I think is actually pretty cool is that from a feed, there was no gas, there was no, complex crypto UI. It's just, pretty image, tap a button, boom, and it immediately went to your wallet. And so there's, I think, been a bunch of innovation on that. And the team has a bunch of improvements for frames this week. So going to kind of keep the momentum going. And given we had like our best day ever in terms of DAO on Saturday, we decided to open up free signups today, which we had our best DAO day again today. So going into the week on a good note. I got accused of the last episode, Erik, is that I was too down on Farcaster. I was giving the kind of like the cold, sober take on how things are going, and then everyone was accusing me of kind of like ruining the hype. But.
Can I hype this product now even more than you did, Dan?
Please.
Okay. So it's funny. Shriram actually just tweeted that it reminds him of the excitement of like Web 2.0 in like 2005, right? When like a lot of these apps were actually built. It's funny that you mentioned, I didn't realize the Open Graph was actually used in it. And so I think you tweeted about it, Dan, and I retweeted it. And this is interesting for a bunch of reasons. This history is a little bit lost. So let me put on my like Web 2 boomer hat for a second and let the kids gather around the fire and tell you a little story here. In fact, by the way, I'm doing, Spindle is doing a blog post on why frames is important, Dan, by the way. And I open it actually with a passage from Chaos Monkeys. I talk about Open Graph in Chaos Monkeys and what a phenomenal flop it actually was. So again, like harp sounds, let's go back 10 years, kids, to like 2011 or so. And what was this whole Open Graph web platform thing that some people are probably old enough to remember? Surely everyone remembers like Spotify and like when Netflix was starting. So you had these like siloed social networks. You had these consumer apps that were starting. And the idea was, look, the like button really took off. Remember, we used to have this thing called the like buttons. You'd go read a thing. You'd be logged in with Facebook. You'd like it. It would show up on your feed. The publication would get distribution. You showed off that you read it. You'd have a conversation on your feed. And it was this really exciting sort of like flywheel of like engagement and reading. So like the like button was like this thing that like, took over the web. Like literally the entire web had the damn like button on it.
And was a tracking pixel for Facebook on every website. Well,
eventually. Actually, the opening scene in Chaos Monkeys is telling us not to use the like button, but eventually it was used as a tracking pixel. It was. There's a funny scene in which I fumble telling Zuck what the result of the study was using the like button as a pixel. At the time, it wasn't that informative. Probably is now. Anyhow, so what was the idea in this Open Graph thing? Well, the idea was like create another verb. Like I read, I listened to, I engage with, like the full sentence of doing things on the web. You would have the social network, right? Like Dan and, and Erik, we all know each other. You would kind of embed it in, like you'd log into Spotify and see what friends are listening to, whatever. When you listen to a thing, it would publish an edge, again, in this graph, back to the newsfeed. And it would be this very synergistic interaction of like a social network over here, like socially consumed experiences over here, and it would be magical. And it like totally flopped. And the reasons why it totally flopped, I think, are the inverse of the reasons why Frames is taking off, which is there's a lot of native primitives the Web 2 kind of didn't support, right, in a native way. How is Frames different and more exciting, right? And it's something about the nature of Web 3 that like Frames, I think, is really channeling, which is you do things kind of inline embedded in the action with the thing that you're looking at, right? And the reason you do it, because it's the more natural way of doing it, because the blockchain like mediates identity, payment, consent to do things. Like an exercise we often do at Spindle is like, oh, look at this weird Web3 shit, okay? Like what's the Web2 analog of it? Just to like help us think through like what's the Web3 implication. And we realized there is no Web2 analog of this, right? Like if Amazon could show you an ad for the thing you last looked at on Amazon and do one-click purchase inside that display ad on the top of the New York Times, they would. But you can't do it. There's no way to do it. What do you do, right? Like, where's my payment credential that naturally works with like the iframe showing up on top of the New York Times? Like, it doesn't work, right? All of Web 2 is predicated. All of analytics platforms for Web 2, part of what we do, right, is clicking on the thing, going to another page, logging into the page, entering a payment credential, picking the thing, going to a confirmation page, firing the conversion pixel, which goes back to the original publisher. And there's this whole machinery around stretching out the user experience of this fucking painful funnel. And what you've done with Frames is the exact opposite. It's like, here I am in the social context, right? Like, think of the experiences you could power. Now I'm getting into total pitch mode here, Dan. Think of the experiences you can power with Frames, right? Like, oh, look at this new, I don't fucking know, probably some douchey Barber sweater thing that I just bought. Isn't it cool, right? And I share a link to the product. And boom, a widget pops up saying 10% off, one click to buy, here you go. I click and I buy it. I get a kickback from that purchase. The publisher gets paid, and somebody got 10% off the sweater. Isn't that amazing? And it all happened seamlessly. I literally just shared a link. That's all that happened, right? And the rest is sitting in the OG tags. Or I'm like, hey, really vibing to this, whatever, I don't know, Taylor Swift song. And then boom, there's like an embedded Spotify experience with like a play button. And I just like fucking play it right there, and it just plays, right? There would have been no way to do that at Facebook back in the day, right? And again, like this Web3 just enables these things because you own your identity things are natively financialized. I can pay for things. Like it's a very different experience, right? It smushes together what was this long user funnel into this very sort of embedded experience. It's kind of cool. Is that a good explanation?
It's interesting because Twitter obviously had a period. You can actually go look at this, like Twitter payment links. They partnered with Stripe that they were going to do this. Never kind of worked. I actually think Elon is headed in this direction, by the way. So it will not be crypto powered. It will be, he's getting money transmitter licenses. He's trying to build X, the thing that he actually, merged with PayPal back in the day. So I think commerce on Twitter or X will happen for sure. But I think to Antonio's point, the promise and the exciting thing about Web3, and I did cast as much as saying this, is turns out when you make a guarantee that every single user on the platform has a cryptographic key pair underpinning their identity, so not necessarily exposed to the user, but as a developer, that's just really powerful because it's just you can sling information all around and actually make customized experiences with like a single HTTP, a couple HTTP calls. So, and no like weird OAuth flows that look like you're like giving up, your firstborn child. Like it's just, everything can just kind of happen with a click. And so I think there's a lot of surface area that we can explore with. And so, yeah, I'm excited. It's a developer primitive. So I think it's a little bit of a derivative in the sense that like, okay, I'm focused on growing daily active users. You need developers to build frames, which then potentially get so good that they bring users in. TBD on if that's actually the case, but I think there's a lot of energy behind it. So I think just doubling down on that and seeing how far we can go with it is kind of where we are.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Real quick, what's the easiest choice you can make? Taking the window instead of the middle seat, outsourcing business tasks that you absolutely hate. What about selling with Shopify? Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US, and Shopify is the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Whether you're selling security systems or marketing memory modules, Shopify helps you sell everywhere, from their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. I've used it in the past at the companies I've founded, and when we launch merch here at Turpentine, Shopify will be our go-to. Shopify helps turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, up to 36% better compared to other leading commerce platforms. And Shopify helps you sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. With Shopify Magic, whip up captivating content that converts, from blog posts to product descriptions. Generate instant FAQ answers. Pick the perfect email send time. Plus, Shopify Magic is free for every Shopify seller. Businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/momentofzen. Go to shopify.com/momentofzen now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/momentofzen.
Antonio, do you want to give a brief Spindle update?
Yeah. It's less exciting. I mean, this is a tough act to follow here. He's just had his highest DAU day. Well, I will give the Spindle spin on it, which obviously the marketing perspective frames is kind of interesting, right? For a bunch of reasons. Again, I hate using the word ad because it freaks out everybody in crypto, or just everyone in general. But by ad, I mean like any sort of targeted commercial call to action, right? In which like money changes hands in some way. You could have people very easily referring things, right? In the sense of like, hey, check out this cool product, and someone converts and they actually get paid for it. I think probably a little bit more of data passing needs to happen so you know who's referring, and like there's a few other things that probably need to get added in there. But I think at the end of the day, you could actually have a very interesting ad system. There's these things called channels inside Farcaster, right? So you manage like a channel, and it's kind of something between like a Twitter list and like a group chat. And there's an admin for it, so it'd be interesting if they're in some sense a pseudo publisher who can actually control the content that gets posted there. Some of it might be commercial in nature. It's interesting that again, part of Spindle's original thesis is the blockchain, the common ledger that's like natively financialized is a great marketing tool that you could potentially have. And having a publisher that has native integration that's wallet aware, right? That like knows who the user really is and what they're doing. In a way that they can totally consent and opt in and opt out of, right? They can swap in or out their wallet or do whatever they want. Is really quite interesting. And again, like it's funny, like Web 2, I don't think most people realize that Web 2 is held together with like, cookies and duct tape and device fingerprints and glue and mobile deep links and all this random crap that was like baked on top of open protocols like HTTP, that it wasn't really meant to do that. And yet somehow it still works, right? And like you have the native technology bed of the crypto is actually much better for a lot of these things. So it'll be interesting to watch it come to fruition in a real compelling consumer experience.
The side chat that Antonio and I have on Signal is all I'm getting educated all the time on attribution and why we could be the next big platform. Farcaster, or in this case, Farcaster doesn't have an ads policy. Warpcast, the client, our app, we do not have ads yet, but maybe at some point. And I think for us, probably be something where people can opt out or opt in, and then they get basically paid in the sense that their account is free for the year or something like that. Versus if you don't, then you have to pay out of pocket. So we'll see.
And then the ad system has to in some sense clear the bar of what the protocol costs to maintain the user, right? Which was always true, right? Like at Facebook, you had to like have an ARPU that paid for the server fees, but in this case, it's quite explicit, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one interesting thing about Farcaster and for sure has hurt our growth in the top line is, so we just crossed 70,000 users, big sign up week this last week. And of the 70,000, 50,000 have signed up since, kind of the beginning of November. And those people paid. They paid in crypto over the internet. Now, a lot of those people actually paid Warpcast in an in-app purchase. And then we kind of abstracted away the payment to the blockchain. But fundamentally, the Farcaster protocol has 50,000 paid signups. So we're optimistic that maybe that actually is a kind of a sustainable model at some level. But I would agree with Antonio that when you really hit a certain amount of scale, obviously free with ads is the winning business model of the internet. And so I think the nice thing about Farcaster is you'd have choice. Like you could choose to use a client that's paid and you don't have to see ads. And then there are going to be a lot of people who are just like, I just want the free version and I don't mind ads. And that works for everybody else too.
Or you're going to have a version for people who are influencers who actually get paid, right? And you see this in Twitter. There's like tweeters out there, like I get paid a few $100 every once in a while. People there who get paid a few thousand. You're going to have the same thing inside Farcaster. You're going to log into your wallet and like, oh, look, there's 1.5 ETH in there that wasn't before. Well, clearly I referred things, or I influenced things, or I drove things, or I managed a channel that was profitable. Like again, native financialization in crypto just makes it very easy to seamlessly pay or get paid for things and have value transfers happen very, very simply and easily. And no.
Yeah, and I mean the whole Twitter payout thing is this opaque black box. Great, right? Like you get paid and way more than you would at a subscale social network in crypto. But as the crypto networks grow, one of the interesting things is that like I don't even need to worry about whether Warpcast showed me the cast, because I can just look at the engagement from a cast, and I could then potentially, for an influencer, it's like, hey, if you cast about my product based on the amount of engagement across the entire protocol, I can just then pay you directly. And I can actually do my own analysis or use a tool to make sure that it wasn't fraudulent, right? So the transparency of data, right, and tools like Spindle, where it's just like you can just hoover up all of this public data and actually slice it.
We don't like the verb hoover. We don't like the verb hoover, Dan. We don't use
no hoover. You make sense. You make sense of this sea of public data. How about that?
Yes.
But anyways, I think that there's just going to be a lot of really interesting stuff, and then obviously there's going to be a big push as this stuff grows, where people are going to be like, wait a second, this is way too much information, just like with Web 2 social, and there'll be this big privacy push. But even in a world where there's privacy, people will just opt into certain experiences, right? It's like, I want the free version and I'll opt in here and I'll give you some zero knowledge version of this. And some tool like Spindle will be able to actually kind of connect it all. And so it's still privacy preserving. But as Antonio points out, it's like once this infrastructure finally kind of clicks in, everything will just be way more efficient, way more tailored. Like just the user experience for everything will just get better. Whereas I think today where it is just, it's so clunky because so much of the infrastructure costs money. People don't have wallets. And so I think where we are in the crypto cycle is like, we're going to see over the next 2 years, the tech has really gotten better over the last, 3 or 4 years since I've been working on Farcaster. Like the level of sophistication of the different tools in the ecosystem, whether it's an embedded wallet or the analytics stuff like Spindle. I mean, in my 10 years in crypto, none of that stuff existed. So the fact that you as a consumer app builder in crypto actually have a modern set of tools that you can actually build an experience that completely abstracts away all the complexity of crypto. like it'll be a good sign as if 2 or 3 years from now, we're not talking about consumer crypto. It's just consumer. And underneath the hood, all of this crypto stuff is actually enabling those unique and useful experiences.
Yeah. And if the crypto bull market, in fact, comes out, right, like a lot of these projects are going to launch tokens. And since that's a work kitty to go and acquire users, that's liquidity they'll be able to apply for rewards and incentives, and which again is a positive thing if used wisely. So yeah, I think the next crypto wave will be interesting. I think it'll be a lot smarter than hopefully than the previous ones. So, and a lot more consumer friendly.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. If you're a startup founder or executive running a growing business, you know that as you scale, your systems break down and the cracks start to show. If this resonates with you, there are 3 numbers you need to know: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000. That's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamline accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind, so you get a customized solution for all your KPIs in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need all in one place. Right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist, designed to give you consistently excellent performance, absolutely free, at netsuite.com/102. netsuite.com/102 to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/102.
The group chat has had more arguments than usual recently. I would say it's we're having serious arguments about serious topics like
I don't know how serious it is, but okay.
America, Europe. We'll get into that. Bryan Johnson, big disagreement about Bryan Johnson. Social media's impact on Gen Z. Is that correlation, causation, or is there actually something happening there? And then lastly, maybe the biggest disagreement of all is on Sydney Sweeney. And
look, Erik, I'd agree with the other members in the group, but then we'd all be wrong. So,
wait, just for the record, I think Antonio and I are both in the camp that like Sydney Sweeney is, she's definitely not one of the more attractive actresses that have ever.
Hold on. I have no opinion on this. I have eyes only for one woman in this world. So
I think there's a split in the group of whether she's mid or hot, and I don't know, Erik, you may be in the pro Sydney Sweeney camp.
Me and Catherine Boyle are pro Sydney Sweeney. I stand with women. Oh
God. Can we talk about something less controversial like Israel, please? Just to tune down the sort of heat level on the episode a little bit.
Wait, did you guys see that Sydney Sweeney got hacked and it was like a crypto hack?
Yes.
Because of course.
That's amazing. We'll link to it. That was good. Let's briefly get into the Europe thing, because this has been an ongoing controversy. Antonio, you wrote about it today. Why don't you share where you're coming from and where you think people misunderstand here?
Look, the problem is that the facts on the ground, we all agree. It's just like the meta emotional reaction to the reality is where we disagree and cut.
So wait, we all agree that they're Euro poors.
Right, except that why is it the roads in Spain are better than the ones in the richest state in the United States, right? You don't come here and it's but Americans are wealthier, but why does it feel like a third world country, right? Why did I have to go change my car glass 4 times last year, right?
Why is that, Antonio?
Well, look, here's the reality. Here's the fact on the ground, right? Techno-capitalism works amazing in the United States. It's incredible. And then everything else is like a total fucking basket case, right? And the reality is Americans used to not even pay attention to Europe 20 years ago. Who the fuck cared about Europe, right? It used to be that scene in Mad Men, right? With Don Draper and whoever his little sidekick was. And the guy says, "Oh, I feel sad for you." And then Don Draper says, "Well, I don't even think about you at all," right? And that used to be the American position to Europe, which is a powerful position. But now it's "Oh, have you seen the air conditioning penetration rate in Bulgaria, or have you seen some ridiculous statistic?" And then it's and then in the same group, and I'm just using the group to channel the zeitgeist because of course MOZ is upstream of everything. It's literally 2 seconds before they were complaining about the most deranged third world, developing world shit that happened in the United States, and isn't it the entire island of Oahu or whatever burned down, and the American government has done nothing for 6 months, and it's just sat there, this broken wreck, and it's a human tragedy, by the way, just to be clear. I'm not laughing about it at all, but it's And then this like horrible thing that would never happen. Guess what doesn't happen in Spain, right? Just as an example, right? If you're talking about GDP or the Europors, right? Like that's the delta, right? And the reality is that like actually the quality of life is better in the US if you're like the sort of median income person. And there's just a delta there. If you're, Europe is like a normally distributed country in all regards, right? While the United States is like bimodal in all regards. You're either like the most amazingly high agency genius person like Elon, or let's just say you're on the other side of the spectrum or whatever. Or you're like literally this triathlete, Ironman, whatever. Or you're like obese and putting your little mobility scooter through the Walmart eating fucking Doritos or whatever, right? It's just always this binary thing. And it's just different. Like what isn't necessarily better than the other? But it's funny how all the conversations, I'll just end with it. All the conversations in the group about this end up in two buckets. One, either whatever thing you're looking at in the United States, it's worse in Europe based on like literally a tweet. Or actually, this weird thing that looks terrible is actually amazing, actually. And you just don't get it. We never land in the bucket of like, well, that kind of does suck in the US. It could do a better job of it. Like that is never the answer to the conversation. It's always one of the other two. And it's this weird schizophrenic thing where it literally goes from complaining about the most insane thing going on in the US. And then, by the way, the Europers. That's it. That's my take.
But the thing is, so the context here is Antonio somehow ended up a group with a bunch of just like red-blooded American patriots. And then he has to play the foil of kind of like...
Who bitch endlessly about America.
Right, but these are all people who deeply care about this country. And then somehow, you have to represent an entire continent. And, I've said this publicly as much. It's like anytime someone mentions Europe, Antonio has to like put it on his, all right, I gotta defend the continent, like the GTA meme. The memes. I guess my problem with Europe is all the talented people from Europe, they all end up coming to the United States. Not all, like
but I don't even accept that.
You can't use like Mistral as like the one example of like, oh wow, they have like one company. Congratulations. It's like I think Patrick Collison tweeted this. It's like they have two companies in the top 50, like globally.
So maybe one of those amazing American companies can invent a fucking trash bin because New York, instead of putting the fucking trash bags outside so the rats fucking eat it, like we're in fucking, a country with a GDP of $3,000 per. Maybe one of those companies can invent one of those, right? Like,
right, but it has nothing to do with the companies. It has everything to do with the Democrats who are running those cities.
But all that shit. Excuse me, but tell me, why is it the Barcelona Metro is better than any train in the United States? It's better than the New York City subway train. Why is that? What explains that?
Why do you need trains? Like, who cares about trains?
Roads. The roads in the fucking little Galician little village that my family's from are better than the roads in the richest state in California. Explain that. Oh, the Spanish have a siesta. Well, I guess they get a lot done in the fucking morning, so the roads are better. Like, it's like such obvious cope on the American side. It's like, sorry, the infra just is better in Europe. The crime is lower. Dude, why is the life expectancy in the United States comparable to Albania's? Which it is, by the way. Like, everyone, Bryan Johnson wants to live forever. How about you just make Americans live like 10 years longer? How about that? Because that's how much the average American male is behind other high, GDP countries, right? Like that's the cope. It's like, all the most talented people come. Look at Elon. It's like, yeah, okay, but like, what is the actual literacy rate broadly in the United States? Why is the longevity so low? Why is the Caltrain a mess? Why does SF? Anyhow. That's the thing, right? It's like you can always
as the guy who lives in San Francisco.
Yeah, I know, but it's like I get it. It's like it's like a zeroth world, world. It's like an EAD futuristic state next to like a third world country. Like it's what it is, right? It's like okay, I get it, but it's like.
Antonio, why do you think these disagreements have been flaring up more recently? Like what's changed, or why are we having these more often recently?
Well, because you're having American society obviously kind of keel over in various ways, I think, but in a way that it didn't 10 or even 20 years ago. Look at the Claudine Gay scandal at Harvard. Like literally the country's most storied institution is obviously kind of a sham. And we don't need to, I think we've covered that already in this podcast, right? Or like the situation in Hawaii in which they had a massive fire and nobody did anything. Or, the poor, we spent what, 50, 60 billion dollars on high-speed rail in California. And the French, by the way, firm that was retained to build the fucking thing bailed and went to Morocco because California was too corrupt and inefficient for it to deal with. And so it built one in North Africa instead, right? Like you have shit like that. And it's like, how can you spin that into a win? Well, you can't, right? Like it sucks. And so you have to go and like, it's like, the angry guy getting home and like kicking the family dog. Oh, the Europors, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, but like, Why is the quality of life there better? Explain that.
Antonio, do you think Europe is on the upswing? Like, are you bullish?
No. It's just stable. No, it's definitely not on the upswing. It's just, I don't know. It's steady. It's amazing. Spain will be Spain until the day I die. Like San Francisco, I don't know. I don't even know what it's going to look like in 2 years, much less 30 years from now.
But you don't agree with like Balaji on America, right?
No, of course not. No. I mean, the U.S. is a phenomenally wealthy country. It has so much economic inertia, and it holds the world at ocean's length. I mean, even my grandkids won't have to worry about Chinese aircraft carriers, assuming we still have them sailing underneath the Golden Gate, right? Like, that's just the reality of it. No. I'm not a doomer on the U.S. I'm not at all. Actually,
your view, Antonio, basically that if you're rich, it's better to be rich in the U.S., but if you're poor, it's better to be poor in Europe?
I'm not even sure that's true. I know lots of wealthy people that we're not going to name here, and like they live like the wealthy people in the developing world. They live in compounds. They have no shared public space. They're all scared shitless about what their kids are going to do in school, and do they pull them out of school, and do they homeschool them? I mean, here's another like dig on the U.S. a little bit. Like the list of shit you have to worry about in the U.S. that nobody, again, in a high GDP per capita country ever worries about is very long, right? Like, you know, I was randomly reading a biography of Mayim Bialik, the host of Jeopardy and actress. She went back to acting because she couldn't afford healthcare. And it's like, again, nobody in a high GDP country thinks about, I have to make career choices. Otherwise, if I get a disease, I'm just going to die or go bankrupt. It's like, nobody thinks that way, right? Or like, I don't know, I can't have family because my housing policy is so fucked up, I can't afford a house. Like, there's just things, or, you know, I'm $250,000 in debt, so I've got this massive load on my shoulder when I'm entering the world in my early, like, nobody really thinks about that. Like, and just, I think Americans, like, you know, the boiling the frog have just optimized themselves to such a space where there's a lot of things you have to worry about and be super anxious about. And I don't know, you see other parts of it. I mean, this you can be a little bit too nostalgic about, but there's more of a social fabric in other countries, right? Like, family and friends matter more. Everything's not hyper optimized for productivity. You know, things are less transactional. I don't know. A lot of this accelerationist trend in the U.S. is just the fact that the government is so sclerotic and so like dysfunctional. You can't expect them to solve anything, right? And so in some sense, you're like, fuck it, foot on the gas. Let's push through this like local minimum and see what's on the other side of it. And I think the reality is like, sure, people in Europe are definitely less ambitious, like no question. But it's like, to be blunt, they don't need to be because their society isn't broken and fucked up like the American one is. It's like, I've often joked, San Francisco is a hub of startup innovation. You know why? Because it requires billion-dollar fucking unicorns to solve its problems. And this is literally true. Airbnb was founded because the Airbnb founders were trying to stay in San Francisco, and the hotels are so shitty and the housing policy is so fucked up, they couldn't even find a bed to crash for a conference. That's literally the origin story for Airbnb, right? Like, why did Uber take off here? Because public transit sucks and the taxis fucking suck. You know, a lot of things you could cite is just like, okay, like, put it this way. Americans are very proud of finding solutions to problems only they have. And it's like, the reason why a lot of these like technical solutions don't crop up in Europe is because they're not problems, right? I didn't use Uber in Barcelona. I didn't need to, right? And so like, that's also part of it.
Antonio, but do you think that that's a function of basically they've had 50 plus years, 70 years where they haven't had to think about their security, right? So the Americans take care of the big bad Russians, and Europe decided, okay, we'll take that money of GDP and put it more towards healthcare.
Yeah, but the delta in GDP consumption isn't that high. Like the NATO target is 2%, which admittedly some countries don't reach. And I forget what it is in the United States, but it's something like 4 or 5%. Like, it's just not that much. That's the other thing, by the way. By the way, I'm not like pro-European, like these American socialists who think Europe is paradise are also full of shit. It's not, right? Like, but like both sides are kind of like deluded about what it is. Like when I posted that thing, someone's going on about, but they're socialist welfare economies. Bro, so is the US. 22% of US GDP goes into social welfare programs. You know what it is in Europe? 27%. It's not that much higher. You know what the max?
The top marginal tax rate in California plus federal is higher than basically any country in Europe.
Yes, I was about to say, like, Americans think they're like a dynamic low tax environment. No, they're not. I mean, the marginal tax rate here, including state and local, is probably what, in the low 40s altogether?
No, in California, top marginal tax rate plus the federal, you're over 50%.
Right, which is the highest tax rates in Europe, which I think is Spain and Germany. The difference being, you know, in Europe, you kind of get something for it. Here, you're still paying $40K a year for your kid to go to a different school, so they don't become a guinea pig in a social experiment.
Yeah, but right? The difference is in Spain and Germany, you can't join a startup and have, you know, differential outcomes in wealth generation, right? So in California, you can, and you're willing to pay the 50% taxes because it's the only place in the world that you can have that happen. Obviously, that's not a policy for everybody in society, but that's the reason San Francisco works.
Yeah, that's right, and it's amazing because you go. When I wrote, I think I've told the story when I wrote the Chaos Monkeys. I thought, I have to I have a new passport. I have to reboot my career in Europe. So I spent time in European startup ecosystems, Spain and Berlin, which were pleasant. But yeah, it felt like this weird cargo cult in the original sense of the term, right? People like going through the motions of what brought the big planes full of goodies, like, and yet somehow the big planes full of Google and Facebook never arrived. Like they used all the same lingo. The government did all the right things. Like in Barcelona, the city hall has like a YC that pays for office space in like a cool part of the city that they've renovated and gives you 50K euros to hack on a thing, right? Like they do all the right things, but somehow it doesn't come quite together. And then the United States does everything wrong, and yet it actually comes together, which is amazing, right? But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. You know this guy Antonio. We won't mention his name, but young guy was living somewhere else in the U.S. and was trying to figure out where he should be, and my only answer to him was like, okay, you can stay wherever you want. You could have a nice life, or you could go to San Francisco and try for glory. Like that's the actual thing. And I think that is the dysfunction of San Francisco, the fact that it's all these transplants, that there is no kind of local culture and all this, whatever, all the stuff that people complain about who work there from a tech standpoint. Yeah, it's all true. But like the generational outcomes, the open AIs of the world, the Coinbases, the Airbnbs, the Ubers, the Googles, like they are all in this little strip of land between San Francisco and San Jose, and like your access to the potential, life-changing outcomes, and there's a whole range of those. But just to think that like the office manager at Coinbase probably made, I don't know, several $1 million, just it's an insane thing. And so, that engine is I think worth preserving. And in some ways, if that means we have all the dysfunction, we have all the stuff that makes America terrible, I don't know if I would trade it to be kind of in this kind of non-accelerationist stasis that is Europe. So it's like, I'm glad Europe exists for the people who want to go live in Europe or live in Europe. But like, I wouldn't make the US more European at the expense of not having the kind of forefront of innovation, right?
And that's the open question. Could you have a functioning United States with a functioning government arm and yet have the private sector actually be as dynamic and as effective as it is? I don't know. It seems like the answer is no.
Well, maybe that's the 1950s, right?
Yeah, I mean, the 1950s were special for a bunch of reasons. But yeah, but getting back to the San Francisco thing, and hint, the person you're talking about currently lives in the Spindle office, by the way, or upstairs from it. Yeah, but the problem is, here's the analogy I cite. You don't live in San Francisco anymore. And then it's classic. Most everyone moves out of San Francisco once they've either made their bag or given up on it, right? Like they bail. And they either, go to Marin or, go to LA or Park City, Utah, as the case may be. But San Francisco, right, with all its challenges and its craziness, is to the United States kind of like the United States is to the rest of the wealthy Western world, which is, yeah, if you want to play in the main arena, if you want to live this crazy dynamic thing, if you want to live a crazy lifestyle with a quality of life that's kind of shitty, but with like a big chance at like the big time, you kind of stick it out. And if you don't, you're like, look, I don't want my only financial out. The only chance for my child to have a normal life to like hit it big as the office manager at Coinbase, like I don't want to play those odds. Then you move and you leave and you go somewhere else, right? And so that's kind of what it is. It's like, well, at some point.
Yeah, I guess I agree with you that it's like, that's not a way to have like the median person's like government, just like we shouldn't be optimizing for that. But at the same time, like the fact that, and I always use Elon as the example, it's like SpaceX, Tesla, like those companies, that is a function of the dysfunction of the US and that bimodal distribution of like, we enable the people who want to go all out to get to the top. And we celebrate it, right? As much as Elizabeth Warren and AOC want to, wealth tax and trash billionaires. The reality is, and Antonio, I think you have the better line here. Something. What's your quip? Something is like everyone in America thinks they're got to be a millionaire. Or
oh no. Well, this is it's a Steinbeck quote. It's I forget the exact wording, but socialism never took off in the United States because no one thought themselves a penniless peasant, but rather a temporarily embarrassed millionaire or something like those lines, right? Everyone thinks their kid's going to be Elon, but like, look, the reality is your kid isn't going to be Elon, and then what?
Right. But I guess what I'm saying is, I think that's a wonderful thing about this country, and it's worth the downsides, and we could improve some of the downsides, like, bring up.
For us, it is. For us, it is. I don't think it is for everybody. For us, it definitely is.
I think for the median American, it is, because it's on average they're wealthier than other people in other countries, and most of them don't live in these dysfunctional Democrat-run cities, right? It's like they live in like the suburbs, and that's kind of pleasant. It's kind of sterile and big box stores, and you're driving everywhere, but it's I don't know, it's not like some poor city in India or whatever country that is still developing and really, really tough things that they still have like basic human needs. And I think like, living in suburban Illinois, it's not that bad, right?
But note the frame shifting, right? You're comparing the median U.S. outcome to a developing world outcome when that's not really the comp, right? The comp is growing up in rural Illinois versus growing up in Lyon, Bordeaux, or one of the second cities of France, right? Like that's the actual comp if we're actually doing the comp. Like, yeah, compared to the developing world in a village in a place with a GDP per capita of whatever, a few thousand, of course. But that isn't the comp, right? And like, again, I always cite the example. So when I went to grad school at Berkeley, I went to iHouse, International House, which was this international dorm with lots of international students. And I spoke French at the time. I hung around with all the little Frenchies who came, and they were the elite. They were the from École Polytechnique and Normal Supérieur, like the schools that the founders of Mistral went to, right? They are the French elites, actually. And I think out of like the 20 or so Frenchies there, I think one stuck around to do finance in New York, and the rest went back. And this was the French elite. They took one look at like 2001 booming Silicon Valley and said, I've got a nice life in France. See you later. And so when the Americans say, by definition, we're getting the best and the brightest, like, I mean, to be blunt, no, you're not. the average polytechnicien is not getting on a plane to the United States. Like, no, they're not. And no question there is, and we know some of them, French guys who come here and whatever, and you can define them as the best and the brightest, but strictly speaking, within their society, they kind of weren't, right? The best and the brightest stuck around because the life they had waiting for them was actually a lot better than slogging it out in the Google mines at the hope of having an exit when it's like, I've got my whole life planned out for me. I've got my little house in the country. I've got my place in Paris. Like, why would I do this? Right? And so they just bail on it. Right.
But you've shifted now. You're giving me the elite in Europe, which obviously, why would they want to leave? Like elite anywhere.
Sorry, you framed it. You said the best and the brightest. I'm citing the best and the brightest.
Oh, the best and the brightest. I mean, like, I'm sure we can go through a whole list of people from Europe who've founded companies in San Francisco or the Bay Area, and basically didn't do that innovation there. And Mistral is now the only thing that people keep citing. That's like, there is some Silicon Valley level, Andreessen Horowitz, several $100 million fundable talent in Europe, right? Or it's like the Europeans are talented, but the European Union is the thing that scares these people, or the labor laws in all these countries. But I guess I go back to is the thing is if you're in suburban Illinois or whatever median place in the United States, your ability to have your child get up to the next level and make progress in life. I don't think that exists in Europe. I think people are much more within the their place. If you grew up in Lyon, you're not kind of like shooting up.
I hate being the guy who cites the studies, but to try to use more than anecdata, there's a number of studies you could look at, which basically look at income tier of the parent or income decile of the parent and where the income decile of the child and whether it's an upward or downward step. There is social mobility in Europe. And again, there's more of it. It's funny, you mentioned the Lyon example. So I didn't go to a prestige school because my parents weren't of that elite thing and they probably couldn't have paid for it. I know lots of people who went to the elite Parisian schools because they tested into it because they're very bright, and that's it. They took the French equivalent of the SAT. They did really well, and done. They became part of the French elite just based on school alone, which is what the École Polytechnique was designed to do, actually, right? Napoleon went there, and he did not come from wealth, right? And compared to me, I mean, my God, the corruption, like talk about shit fucked up in the United States, the absolute corruption of university admissions with legacy and DEI and affirmative action, like all these hacks that actually are not geared to actually reward academic merit and actually ding people like Asian Americans who actually test very well, but then get dinged in the actual selection process. And this has showed up in court cases and studies. Like this isn't a conspiracy theory, right? Like how can you look at that and say, yeah, well, the US is more meritocratic and socially mobile? Is it? because I haven't felt that. I mean, certainly has been my experience, and there's a lot of stats you can look at that would say otherwise, right? But, I mean, what are the chances that a kid from Detroit or Oakland actually ends up at Berkeley and actually ends up in the tech elite? I mean, is it as much as like an English working class kid from a rough neighborhood? Because I've met some of those, and some of those did go to Cambridge because their O levels were good and they tested well and they got there.
Well,
Like,
I think
that's
actually what happens in
happened
the United States is the immigrants outcompete them, right? So if you were to say who are
exactly,
the primary people who succeed in Silicon Valley, like they tend to be foreign because they actually have like a level of work ethic that I think most Americans don't necessarily have at this point.
Which is great. And I think, the statement that America takes in immigrants and makes them a better version of themselves and makes them wealthier is great. I mean, it's true. If you compare, I don't know, the Swedish Americans in Minnesota to the Swedes in Sweden, they have higher incomes and better life outcomes in the United States than there. But I think it's also, I mean, even there, right? It's like, why is it that the U.S. has to import so much either talent or labor? Like, why isn't that American schooling can actually generate that internally? That's another question I've always had, right? Like, it's great that the U.S. can do it, and they're rightly kind of proud of it. But on the other hand, they're kind of spinning a story. It's like, well, what? American schools aren't good enough? Like, you're not smart enough to just like power an entire tech industry based on your own talent, right? Like, we all know that Silicon Valley, I mean, all of us are one generation away from immigrants, and then we all work with people who are literally like zero generation, whatever you call it. Maybe we got the generation. We're second generation, they're first generation, right? Like, why is it that you actually don't have a kid from Montana coming and becoming a Google engineer, right? That actually isn't a common story.
Late stage Roman Empire, all the people in charge were immigrants or conquered peoples. So there you go.
Okay. How did that turn out for the Romans, by the way?
Yeah, I know.
How did that story end? Okay, then.
but I guess like it's fun to pick on the Europeans, but I think my general view is like nice place to visit, amazing cultures, amazing food, like history, but it's like they're throwing soup on the Mona Lisa. It's like, okay, like I'm just far more interested in what's happening in the United States because, like, despite all the dysfunction, like we are the ones pushing civilization forward in a meaningful way.
Wow! And they just removed the Thomas Jefferson statue from whatever it was in New York, right? Like,
sure. I mean, we have plenty of that crazy stuff too. But it's like SpaceX launched two rockets tonight to put Starlink satellites into space. And the Europeans are still in the planning mode for whatever their European constellation of internet like is. Right?
All right, but guess what? And once they implement it, I'm willing to bet you it'll be better than that. That's the thing. Americans are very good at innovating at the cutting edge of innovation. But guess what? Internet bandwidth is actually higher and cheaper in Europe than it is here. It actually is. Data fees are actually lower in Europe than they are here. You can actually get like fiber in the middle of fucking nowhere in rural France. Good luck getting that in the rural parts of the United States. It's just true.
Why do Europeans have Android phones then instead of, why are they green bubbles instead?
Oh God, the whole Android iPhone thing. I don't think that's even true anymore. I mean, even in India where iPhone used to be negligible, is not quite high.
So, but you do agree that U.S. is a better place for innovation and will continue to have more economic prosperity. But I
think techno-capitalism works amazingly well here, and everything else does not work well.
But that's not everything there is to the good life, and we still await. When Spindle sells for a lot of money or goes public, what you do next? Do you get off of Twitter and the spectacle and then go chill in a boat?
Of course.
Or do you?
Antonio claims that he's gonna be completely offline after he makes
completely, but definitely not like I am now. Yeah, definitely.
You're gonna be like Elon, man. You're gonna be saying you're gonna.
I'll do. Look, Erik, I'll promise you one MOZ episode from my little house built out of stone in northern Spain somewhere, and then that's it. And then I'm out forever. That'll be my last experience. That's it. That's right.
We'll have to do an episode where we track Antonio down and do like a vlog.
Yeah, exactly. We'll still be here in the mines. Let's segue into Bryan Johnson.
Oh man.
So Antonio, you have no love lost for the man himself.
But hold on. I don't dislike the guy, to be clear. I find the fascination, and look, I'm pro like builder and doer and experimenter of things. Like I'm not against the guy, but like it obviously comes from a place of deep narcissism. I mean, who are we kidding here, right? And like take the personal Bryan Johnson out of it, right? This focus on longevity, which is different, by the way, than like medical care. Like a cure for cancer, I think is universally great. Okay, but we're not talking about like fixing the broken stuff. We're saying like subverting the natural age. Like if there was a magic live forever pill or a magic live 100 extra years pill, that's kind of what they're talking about, right? And I think in some ways, I think immortality would be the true extinction event for humanity, right? In the sense that, like, what has driven civilization, I mean, to quote unquote, is like societies are happy when old men plant trees whose shade they know they'll never sit under, right? The idea is that you invest what Becker, psychologists would call immortality projects, right? And typically they're locally something like family or community, or maybe it is a political cause or a tribe or a nation, or maybe even tech innovation. I think Elon very clearly has an immortality project. He, by the way, is anti-Bryan Johnson, anti-longevity, interestingly enough. And his immortality project is getting humanity to Mars and becoming a multiplanetary species. Big project.
And having 10 children.
And having 10, exactly, and having 10 children, right? While Bryan Johnson, I think, to be blunt, is using his child as his blood boy, right? It's like, man, talk about the symbolism. Jesus Christ, right? Like, and that's the problem, right? If you actually extended life to, and we see it now, right? The fact that you can extend your youth into adolescence forever means you don't get married, you don't take the big risks. It's very different to look at a world that has the Bryan Johnsons of the world and holds that up as a hero. And then I know I'm always going to do that, like go straight to Israel, but the internal Israeli narrative, which is fighting this like pitched, what it considers to be a mass war, a war of mobilization and survival, in which you have, as a side thing, there's this trope in Israel where if you write a letter to your family before you ship out and you deploy, and if you get killed, the family or somebody shares the letter. And it's always this very touching, sad thing where some father of three got killed and then, tells his family not to be sad and move on, basically, is how these things go. And like, how do you reconcile the heroism in one, or even like, forget the Israel thing, the Navy SEALs who died in the Houthi Yemen thing, right? So 2 SEALs, apparently there's some sort of accident. One fell into the ocean, apparently. One dove after him and they couldn't recover them and they died, right? They sacrificed themselves for a greater cause. In what pantheon of heroism or morality do you reconcile Bryan Johnson, who literally is willing to spend his entire fortune to do nothing but extend his own life for the sake of extending it, to be clear? It's not like some other cause he's working on. It's like, no. I'm here to just make me not die, right? He literally says that to someone who says, I'm willing to die and sacrifice everything for this bigger cause. How, in what system of morality and what pantheon do those two people coexist? I would say they don't, right? And you're not going to have the Navy SEALs or the Israeli father of 4 who, reservist who deploys, and the Bryan Johnsons in the same society. You can't. And I don't know. I think that's it's quite a trade-off.
My take is Bryan Johnson doesn't bother me. I think it's great that he's using his money to push the frontiers of understanding the human body. I honestly don't care about his motivations, whatever reason he wants to do it. I hope we benefit from the self-experimentation, right? Wasn't it a polio vaccine that he administered to himself? Yeah. So I think that there's a tradition there, and like my bias is like, okay, the FDA is actually probably killing more people as a result of bureaucracy and not actually letting people take more experimental risk. But I think I agree with Antonio on just the general longevity point is that I don't think it works for society. Like we're seeing a society today that is run by 80-year-olds, and it's sclerotic and all of the wrong ways. And it's like there is no vibrancy, there is no vigor, right? Like I basically disagree with Obama on everything, but kind of nice to have a president under the age of 50, right? Like and so I think this world where we extend the life of everyone and just power compounds, right? Like Warren Buffett is 90 something, and people are still talking about it's like, no, this is not natural, right? Like you want actually the generational turnover. And, I think we've talked with Curtis about this kind of like the great turning or whatever, the 80-year cycles. But that kind of assumes that you roughly live to about 80 in a good instance. And that feels like probably the right 80 to 90 feels like a pretty good age range to tap out. Everything above that, you start to really get pretty frail. But, obviously the people who naturally can do that, great. But I think if all of a sudden everyone in society is living to 90, 100, 110, I think things are going to get really, really weird. And just like, let's go through some basic stuff. Housing, completely fucked. Like, and we're going to talk about the US, not Europe here. Completely fucked issue. Like if you have everyone living to 100, like something's going to break there, right? Medical care, like increasing the amount of money we're spending at the federal level is through these healthcare entitlements. And it's about preserving like how much additional life for people and what is the quality of that life. And obviously the insurance companies and the big healthcare systems are happy to have that be part because they make money off of that. And so I think that the like obsession with not dying through science it just doesn't resonate with me. And maybe this is also now that I've had kids, and like I feel like my perspective on things have changed a little bit in the sense that I'm a lot less like 100% me centered, and I start to think through things around a family. And so I feel like the longevity thing in Silicon Valley is a little bit like tied in a little bit more to this whole polyamory, like everything needs to be contrarian, first principles, like secularism, and just doesn't feel very Lindy. And so that's my issue with the macro. It's less Bryan Johnson, because I actually think it's admirable that he's using his money in a way to actually further understanding of science, and not science like, Democrat science. Like this is actually he's experimenting with his own body. But like that's what my take is. And so I'm a little mixed in the sense that like he doesn't bother me specifically, but I do think that the longevity movement as a thing is like, it just bores me to death when everyone at a dinner party, all they want to do is talk about longevity. It's like, okay, most of this science is fake. If anything, actually Bryan Johnson's science is probably, more real in the sense that he's doing it to himself rather than just, reading studies and then talking about it.
One more comment on that. I mean, the longevity thing is just like you misspelled fear of death, right? And like, I can imagine a world without myself. And to your point about the gerontocracy, like imagine Pelosi and Trump lived forever. We're never leaving this fucking political movie, right? This is going to be the same show forever. Funny, there's a great book, actually. I don't read much sci-fi in general, but there's a book called The Postmortal by Drew Magari. It's a little bit of a cult classic, I guess. You can find it on Amazon. And the premise of it is that, there's some telomeric discovery with DNA such that you can have some sort of CRISPR-like DNA modification, and you basically don't age. I mean, you can still get killed, right? Like someone blows your head off, you're dead. But it's like you just don't age, right? And so they call it the cure. And like society, almost like in Children of Men, in which nobody had children, just like begins to collapse for all the reasons that if you actually thought through it, like, okay, imagine you're just age whatever right now forever. Like, what would actually happen to society, right? It's incredible, right? There's there's like a death cult that emerges that starts murdering people because they feel that you're cheating death. There's women who have children are called breeders and are very stigmatized because why are you filling up the planet again? The housing thing that Dan mentioned, China just starts nuking cities because they can't deal with the population and it's autocratic, and so it starts murdering people. Like, and then you have even more stratification of society. You said that, life compounds. Well, wealth compounds, right? And so the Warren Buffett just gets wealthier and wealthier, and a lot of people never manage to pull out of an economic nosedive. And so you have society stratified in the most exponential way you can possibly imagine. Anyway, life just falls apart is what happens, which is why I said I think immortality would actually be the extinction event for humanity, and that might actually be the great filter. At some point, every species engineers itself to live forever, and then it implodes. I would actually bet on that.
Are we on Moment of Zen complaining about economic inequality? Are we socialists or
yes.
something?
Yes, because inequality sucks, actually. And high inequality societies are low trust ones that have all sorts of political volatility to them. And getting back to the Europe topic, the reason why I like Europe, it's like the last fundamental, relatively wealthy, middle-class societies in which it's relatively high trust. There's a public space, there's public parks, there's public goods held in common that more or less work. There's a politics that's more or less sane. I mean, you can make fun of Macron, whatever else, but by and large, things kind of converge to popular will generally over time, unlike here. And it's like, oh, this is like what the US was, I don't know, from 1950 until the 80s, right? This is like what we all had in our heads as a Western bourgeois liberal society. And sure, call it a museum, but guess what? If that's the only museum left with that little piece of art, then I want to live in it because when I look at the window here, that's not what I see, right? And that's the problem.
I don't think Tyler Cowen would concede the point on inequality, but I'm not going to quote him improperly, so I'll concede that point for now. But
well, I mean, not to put words in his mouth, but I know Tyler pretty well. He's the only podcast I listen to. He would make the point that most economists make, which is, oh my God, the poor now have access to luxuries even the wealthy wouldn't have a century ago. It's the usual argument, and it's basically bullshit because it's not the way the mind works. Like, for starters, you can't compare yourself to either royalty or the peasant from a century ago. And the other thing is and they've done these studies again and again, right? Humans would rather earn $90,000 in a society that makes $50K than $110K in a society that makes $200K, right? Like the keeping up with there is no absolute baseline hedonic adjustment thing. Like why do the communist cadres in Cuba keep the system going? Even the wealthy in Cuba live worse than a mechanic does in Miami, but they keep it going, right? Because they're the upper stratum of that world.
But people compare themselves to their neighbors, not to Jeff Bezos, right? Not to Bill Gates. Who cares? But so people compare themselves right to people.
That probably was the case prior to social media. And if you want to talk about the phones, they're fucking everything up. It's like you go on Instagram. It's the easiest way to just feel like FOMO for everything in life. This is like, wow, there's someone more beautiful than me. There's someone more richer than me. There's someone more famous than me. Like,
yeah, but even leave Bezos aside. Who do you compare yourself to? You compare yourself to your parents. All these memes, which are a little nostalgized about, oh, my parents when they were 25 were buying a house and having a family, and I can't do a thing. Or if you have kids, you think, well, my kids gonna have a brighter future. And you look at polls from many Americans, not all, but from many Americans, are like, no, I think my kids are gonna have a worse future. That's where it kicks in, right?
Yeah. Let me respond to the longevity points. The gerontocracy point is interesting because in a world in which anti-aging tech is proliferating, there's this idea that people will not just be live longer, but also live healthier. So in a sort of in a new world, Biden wouldn't be deteriorating at 80. He would be functioning like a much younger person. So maybe there would certainly be a stratified society, compoundingly so, but our sort of old people wouldn't be as dysfunctional as they are now.
But hold on. So let's just take a super simple example. Say Trump could live at the same mental capacity, if you think he's declined 8 years ago, right, when he got elected. Okay, so that version of Trump now is ossified for another 30 years. And don't even make the assumption that he, tries to take over as dictator, like the TDS, fanfic would write. Let's just go through the basic. He loses the election, maybe he wins this time, and then we have him for another 20 years just weighing the scales of the elections, where he endorses candidates, he does MAGA stuff, and it just you don't want that. You don't want these kind of like people to just be able to have power for that long. And wealth accumulates, power compounds. Yeah. So I think you want people to die. Like that is good for society. The other. So talk about wealth inequality. Can I bring that one up? So the best thing to reduce wealth inequality is let the successful people who make the money die and give it to their kids, who on average are going to be less talented and potentially lose the money. And within 3 generations, for sure, that family is not nearly as wealthy as it used to be.
Do we want Elon to die too? All the great things that he's bringing.
Yes, I mean, you don't want a specific person, but it's healthy for society to change over. You don't want a main character for 50, 80 years or something.
So I'm sympathetic to that. There's some strong logic to that. What I don't understand, though, is why we would still support things like cancer, finding cures for cancer, or diabetes, or other things that extend life, and not sort of anti-aging tech. Like,
I guess there's a difference between curing a disease, right, and the magic pill that Antonio is using from a metaphor standpoint. And I think that is it's like do everything in life. And here's the other thing. Let's say that we come up with, I'm not going to use the term blueprint, but a plan that can extend your life by an additional 30 years. And every day you have to wake up and eat this special slop that is loaded with all these special, vitamins and all these things to keep you going. And you're not allowed to have any type of other food, and you can live an additional 30 years. How many people do you actually think would do that? You'd have some crazy people in Silicon Valley who literally think they have these God complexes of I should live as long as I can because I'm so good to humanity. And then most other people would be like, that's not worth it. Why do people smoke cigarettes? They know that it's bad for them. They still do it. And so this is where I think actually it exacerbates some of the worst people, in the sense that there's the type of person who's willing to actually live an additional 30 years eating this magic longevity slop might not be the person you want actually who has the power and influence for an additional 30 years. So look, people are free to do what they want. So I start from that principle. But I think is it a good thing for society to just all of a sudden plus 30 on life expectancy? I don't think so. Maybe 5 to 10 years. I actually haven't thought enough about like what the right curve is on that. But I think 30 seems pretty aggressive. And you know, there are people who make it even longer, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because the longevity industry, which has gotten popular over the last decade, thanks to some friends of ours work starting funds and building companies, and we've, you know, invested in some of those companies, but they hate Bryan Johnson. They think that he is, in the same way that crypto people hate the sort of NFT degens or whatever, or the WAGMI folk. They think that they misrepresent the industry. There's sort of stereotypes. They make a caricature or parody of the industry for the true believers. They think that the Bryan Johnsons of the world sort of confirm everyone's worst fears about the stereotypes of longevity people. And these are, you know, serious scientists who look at you look at what's happening and say, hey, even if we cured cancer, that would only extend lifespan by a couple of years, perhaps on average, because aging is the actual disease. It's the meta disease behind all the diseases. That's sort of the argument that they're making. And these are true scientists, very reserved, calm people, and they're trying to make scientific arguments, and they believe that they're making some progress there. And someone like Bryan Johnson comes in and is a, you know, creator, a character, and you know, alienating people left and right. And so, but what I'm hearing from you guys is you actually don't, you know, you don't necessarily mind that, or you don't particularly focus on that. What you focus on is the underlying substance of the thing, which is, you know, it's a free country. People can work on whatever they want, but you aren't a huge fan of sort of the longevity industry. You are a fan of curing cancer, but you think at some point, even sort of the meta disease that is aging, it will have potentially adverse effects, i.e. Accelerating this gerontocracy, and you have some sort of aesthetic, or spiritual disliking of it.
It's not even spiritual. It's nature. If you have a tree, it's growing.
Yeah, but so is cancer. I just don't understand the cancer. Like, I think it's consistent to be like, we shouldn't cure diseases because they're, you know, that's not natural. We're messing with nature, right?
I see your point in terms of like a gotcha, like, oh, like everything. It's like, oh, you want to improve anything? Like, sorry, like you're messing with nature. I think it's just, it is a natural thing for all living things to die. And the moment you start saying that is like we're going to solve that thing, I think you have all of human societies have had this, and maybe, but I agree with Antonio. I just think that the societal breakdown would happen. It's like the worst science fiction you could think of is when basically people don't die. And I think it actually comes a lot from people, as they get closer to death, relinquish power in all different aspects of life. And it gives an opportunity for a new group of people to be in charge. Imagine working at a company where now all of a sudden the CEO is there, is like, oh, I don't need to retire at 60 because I'm not thinking about, like, you know, death being close. Yeah. I'm going to work till I'm 90. And because I have it, you know, 30 years of my golden, you never get promoted. Like, how do you feel at 50 that you're still kind of like, oh, I'm like a mid-level manager. Like, you know, I never had my shot to get promoted because all of these people continue to compound their power and wealth.
I agree with you that the stratification is a problem. Although I do think that, you know, this is the type of thing where people agree in the macro, but on the micro, like, you know, if our parents could live longer, we probably want them to live longer, right? Like when you're about to die, when you want to be healthier in your old age, and I don't think it's going to be this, like, you know, binary thing of, you know, live forever or die now. I think it's going to be more of this incremental thing, and it's just going to make sense to keep wanting to incrementally live longer.
Right. So I think incremental, fine, but I think the change your entire life to maximize the number of years you are living is, I think, maybe, Antonio,
we kind of have that now, right? People are vegetables.
I think that is a little bit more what we're talking about. It is drop everything. Do not enjoy any aspect of your life now, because the primary function that you exist for is maximizing the number of years you live modulo you know, having some sudden death.
I think that's a strong man.
No, but it actually exists. In fact, it's funny, you see it more among the youth than you even do older people. Like, I know I often cast a wide net. I don't like generational thinking in general, but typically if you look at kind of Zoomers, like, it's interesting how many of them listen to like Uberman, they're optimizing their life, they're taking supplements. It's like, bro, like you're acting like a boomer grandma hypochondriac. Like, what? At your age, I wasn't thinking about any of this.
No,
like,
they're acting like a Nietzschean transhumanist.
But it's ridiculous. Yeah, yeah, right. But they're just scared. They're just anxious and neurotic and scared. That's what it is. They're not going to be the Ubermensch. They're going to die one day, and then if they haven't prepared for it and thought about it, they're going to go down like little kids. I mean, it's just. To me, it's the corrupting effect on the sort of virtue ethics of it. Like, you can't have a society that can actually dedicate itself to great causes. Look at the European cathedral. Speaking of Europe, right? It was built, and they were typically finished by the grandson of the original builder. A society won't be able to build those things if you don't sort of look beyond yourself to some greater whole. And again, to me, it's all wrapped up in the same class of people. Like, I think you mentioned, like, EA, Poly, this, like the whole Silicon Valley little ultra optimized people circle. And it's just like, oh God, these are some of the dullest people I know. It's like, literally, it's like you've just created this little secular religion. At least when they were into Burning Man, they had nice costumes or something. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Erik, I want to come back and just like maybe be like really precise in how I want to frame this, because, you know, you brought up a couple of points that I think were pretty good. So I have no problem with the scientific research that I think I started with. And I think Bryan Johnson doing that, that's actually admirable. There are a lot dumber and less productive ways. And again, I believe in personal freedom. If you earn that money, you should be able to do whatever you want with it. So the fact that he's willing to do it and open source it and contribute to the pursuit of knowledge, admirable. And even more so that he's risking his own body with it. Great. I think you brought up the Huberman podcast, or Antonio did, like, that to me is like this Silicon Valley of like everyone and being like, oh, I don't drink alcohol anymore because I heard it on Huberman. And it's all this preening of just like, you sound like, so I don't even know. I don't even want to say what it sounds like, but I think it's just not Lindy. Like, just relax a little bit. Like, okay, so if you don't want to drink alcohol, you don't have to advertise it that it was because you heard it on Huberman. Like, there are plenty of people. Mormons don't drink alcohol, and there are 1 billion plus Muslims that don't drink alcohol. Like, there are plenty of other mechanisms by which people have decided that we aren't going to drink alcohol. They're not rooted in some like Stanford professor who kind of has like a cult following on Twitter. Like, to me, anytime the longevity stuff comes up, it's just basically I have no like belief system rooted in a culture and in a long history. So therefore, I am a la carte assembling it via the Apple Podcast app. Like, Jesus, like what are you going to tell your kids as you're raising them? Well, the great Huberman said this is how our family values. Like, come on, like you can take inputs and learn new things, but you don't have to like basically become an acolyte of the latest and greatest guru on YouTube. Like that's my biggest issue with the whole longevity push is that, and that's the part of Bryan Johnson that I'm less into. And I get that he's using the kind of like persona to be, just like the people who fight with him on Twitter, it Streisand effect. It like further, it makes him famous. But like, I don't really want to hear about the erection measurement penis. Like just say that, yeah, you have a full body. You're trying to use as much data, put it out there. People can find it. People can laugh at it there. But like the marketing of the erection results, I'm like, okay, this is a little spectacle for me. Like,
yeah. I mean, right. Again, how dignified is it for an older man to talk about wanting a teenage male's penis? Like, and then like the counter to that, in one of Socrates' dialogues, I forget who it was, mentions that like losing his libido older in life was like getting unchained from a lunatic, right? Like the fact that like that is wisdom talking, right? But the fact that he wants to go back to what for many of us was perhaps not the most graceful period of our lives, it's just fascinating, this worship of youth that feels so narcissistic and weak somehow. Again, I can't reconcile it with the historical virtues of human life.
I do think he's doing it from a master morality perspective, not a slave morality perspective, unlike other sort of worshiping. It's not like Greta Thunberg style worshiping of youth.
But I don't buy that, actually. I think he's just a narcissist. And is a narcissist a master of anything? No. They're a slave to their own image, and they're a slave to perception of others. It's not master morality.
Let's wrap on this. I love Bryan Johnson. I'm supportive of Huberman. Let the boys have their fun. But
Erik, did you get one of those measurement devices?
No. I don't even engage in any of this stuff. But I think
you have to connect it to a battery, right? I think you have to connect your junk to a fucking car battery, bro. That's what you need to do.
I appreciate.
I think you should live stream it, if nothing else, for the clicks. I
appreciate the performance art of what Bryan is doing and sort of the democratizing of this stuff. But that said, I do. Let's have.
Well, hold on. Just to be clear, he's not democratizing anything, right? That's the other thing, right? It's like it's not actually increasing global life expectancy; it's increasing his own.
No, Blueprint. Right? People could buy Blueprint. Let's have him or Solana or Balaji on at some point. We'll do longer. Another riff.
It depends on what kind of podcast you want.
Yeah, exactly. Let's segue into the cell phone stuff, maybe to close. Jonathan Haidt's new book is about sort of this, tirade he's had for a while now about how Instagram is causing depression among young women and social media is tearing up our democracy and all this stuff. Where do you guys stand on how do we think about isolating the impacts of social media? And also, is this just a temporary phenomenon? Is this just like any new sort of communications revolution where it takes us a generation to get used to, or is this actually something we should be doing something about? Like Haidt, recommends strong regulations as far as I know. So what are your thoughts?
I think we should just go back and nix Gutenberg, boom, no printing press. We don't have to deal with any of this. None of this textual, oral culture only.
Oral culture is Lindy. Reciting the Iliad, beginning to end, is Lindy. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I cited the example of like guns just to kind of emotionally kind of unplug it a little bit, right? Like, here's a thought experiment. If tomorrow every farm in America turned into a fucking donut, would the murder rate go down? Well, like, obviously it would, right? Now, are the guns causing the murder? Well, no, murders will still be caused. The guy who would have shot somebody is going to stab him instead. But nonetheless, like, the efficacy of firearms are better than those of knives, which is why soldiers use them. And so there's clearly some causal correlated motive there. It's the same thing with like smartphones, right? It's the level of neuroticism, and I think Haidt has the actual numbers that you see among teenagers has been heightened by it. And the general political fragmentation, general craziness, waves and all this, right, has obviously gone up. But again, the counter argument is like, dude, what are you going to do about it? Luddism never works. The regulations that, the idiots and the whole content disinformation industrial complex want to put forward to make things worse, which is true. So like, whatever. Humans will adapt to it, and then we'll settle on a new equilibrium, and that'll be the end of it. In the meantime, it'll be kind of a pain in the ass as kids adjust to this thing. I mean, whatever. Like, I don't know. What do you do with Haidt's results? As much as I like Haidt, and I do. Like, what do you do with it?
Yeah, I think it's just cope. Like, it sucks. It's like, this is what we have, but the things are also pretty amazing. It's a supercomputer in your pocket. Like, think about all the things that it does really well. It's technology. There's always a good, there's always a bad. Does he? I haven't read his book. Does he have like specific policy proposals? Like, has he really dug into this?
He's like, we should not get younger girls on Instagram.
Okay, that's just like, parenting.
Yeah.
So this is always the thing. So when you get to a policy where it's like, oh well, if you just had a parent who was strict and said no, in our family we don't do phones and Instagram until we're 18, like daughter's gonna be pissed, whatever, but.
I mean, it might be unavoidable. I have a daughter who's entering her teenage years, and they're all on Snapchat, actually. And like at this point, I think it's impossible to keep her away from it.
I guess what I'm trying to say is like, if that's your policy prescription, it's just like, okay, what? So you're now going to discriminate and say, okay, these ages you can't use apps. That's like saying you can't drink or you can't smoke. The people who are the most at risk to that will do it, and it'll actually be even cooler that they're on it. Oh, she's on Snapchat. She has a secret cell phone. Her cousin, it's come on, like just play all that out. It just sounds so stupid to come up with like a policy prescription to try to change the way teenagers work.
You know what else Haidt said in his book? We should all move to Spain. No, I'm joking. That would solve everything. That would literally solve everything.
I didn't even get to say this in longevity. The longevity stuff, that's actually the point where I kind of want to be like, maybe I should move to Europe. Like, no one in Spain is talking about longevity.
All these blue zones.
Yeah.
Some Sicilian peasant who's drinking a liter of wine a day and has been doing it for 70 years, smokes, and the fucker lives to 120. And like Bryan Johnson's like over there fucking literally like using his boy as his blood boy and spending $2 million a year, and the guy's not even gonna get close.
French paradox, right? Yeah.
Speaking of the French thing, here's a funny story from France, by the way, which enters into this a little bit. In France, I'm not making this up, by the way. This is how it works. You have, what's the name of it? It's like a reverse mortgage in the United States, where if you're not familiar with it, if you own your house outright or you have equity in your house, the bank will buy it from you in a sense, and that you ramp up it basically pays you for the equity ahead of time. But in France, what happens is the buyer does it. The bank doesn't do it. So a buyer comes in, like, I'm not joking. This is like a thing. Look it up. And the woman who lives, typically an older woman, is living in some nice old apartment in Paris. And, you know, she's in her 70s or something. And you buy the house, you make payments on it. You pay the woman because she needs living expenses. And you get it when she dies. That is the trade. It is totally legal. And it is how it works in France. And then you look at the petite annonce in like a French newspaper, and it'll say, you know, apartment available for this sort of end of life setting, you know, avec une vieille dame dans un mauvais état de santé, like, you know, an old lady in a bad state of health. Right? So you're like sitting there buying the house and like, oh, do you want some cigars? Do you want some whiskey? Maybe you should take up motorcycle riding, right? Like literally you try to push this lady over the fucking cliff. And then what typically happens, and I was reading this recently because I was reading about the oldest reported living woman in the world was a French woman who lived to like, I'm not kidding, till 120, and she sold her house like in her 80s in this way. And like fucking 40 years went by. I think the buyers died and the kids inherited the house that they still didn't live in because the lady wouldn't die. And her response was like, you know, in life sometimes you make a bad trade. Anyway, one of the weird things that lives in France where like you buy a house from an old lady. And like, I mean, if Bryan Johnson were French, would anyone buy the house? I don't know. It's like this open betting market on whether he's going to die or not, right? So yeah.
This is the least techno-optimist episode we've ever done.
No, I have to keep saying I am supportive of the science.
Yeah.
But I just find it very boring as a topic. Like people who make longevity their identity at a dinner party. It's just like,
right.
You have literally nothing else to talk about? Maybe that also person is talking about the dangers of Trump at January 6th. And then at that point, I just want to leave the dinner party, right? Like, it's like, oh,
well,
geez.
Speaking of, what do you say to the people who say that social media is fragmenting democracy?
Do you have any basis in history for how fragmented and riled up people have gotten at different points in this country's history? Like, we just had Curtis on, and he talked about like the 1910s and 20s in terms of the amount of like anarchists and socialists and all the communist stuff that was happening in the US. And that was like violent, like actual, like, you know, people with actual guns.
Yeah, but people were saying it was better 20 years ago or whatever, and before social media, and social media has fractured the country. What do you say to those people? Yeah, we get that it was worse.
It's just a decline of the post-Cold War, right? We had a common enemy, and then we didn't have one anymore. And so then the god became, I don't know, techno-capitalism or whatever you want to call it. And there are winners and losers. And when there are losers, those people are the ones who don't like the winners.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, by the way, I looked up the term. It's vente en viager, for those who want to look it up, this whole business of buying the old thing. I mean, I agree with you that like the nostalgizing about the past when, in fact, you know, in the 60s and 70s, terrorism was like a bomb going off every day in the United States for a long time. I think the difference was, and I remember, again, at least I'm part of the bridge generation that remembers the analog world, right? Like the internet hit like when I was in college. And so I remember I was still like the age of reason when I had like card catalogs and books. And I think like this whole disinformation story is bullshit because people used to believe the most wild things, right? Like my grandmother had all sorts of wild stories about all sorts of people and classes of people. And she believed all sorts of bullshit, right? And it was easy to have these sort of very filter bubbly oral, you know, narrative loops because like if it wasn't in like the Encyclopedia Britannica or the Atlas or like whatever library had nearby, it was like, go baby, you can believe whatever you want. There's no way to fact check anything, right? And the only way to actually have any sort of national audience was obviously a newspaper. My first job at a high school was actually at a newspaper back when it was like mostly a print thing in the pre-internet era. And that was the only way to have a national platform for anything, right? So it was just much easier to maintain the nation state in a national narrative. I mean, we're kicking off a whole other thing here, but there's one of my favorite books is called Imagine Communities, which is about the invention of the nation state in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, and it was tightly coupled to the existence of the printing press and standardizing what the author called print capitalism, i.e., a set language. Right, Germany and German was invented. Right, it was based on the German that Martin Luther used in his translation. Italian was based on, I think, either Petrarch or Dante's unifying book. And other countries unified at other points in time, Spain and France that are earlier. But you invented the notion of a nation state and a German people, and you maintain a national narrative with the national press. And then the internet just blew that up. And now every little oral tradition, every little cult leader, every little guru has national. I mean, I think Balaji has the best metaphor for it. It's like Windows. It's like defragging the disk. All the people on the disk that belong in actual different buckets, the internet kind of draws them all together and puts them into one virtual space. The positive side is like that doesn't actually end up in terrorism, because in virtual life, you can go to virtual war and win your little Twitter battles. Nobody actually plants a bomb or kills anybody. Arguably, it's better. I think it's kind of fake and stupid and LARPy, but sure. I mean, look, it's preferable to a lot of the terrorism and fracture we've seen elsewhere. I don't know why. I had the question earlier. I was just thinking, like, why don't we see more political violence in the United States? There's more guns than people. You think there'd be assassinations happening left and right, and yet there aren't. I don't know. I think it's hard. It's hard to motivate people in an actual active movement like way. Like, you haven't seen, for example, the emergence of a new political party since the internet. You've seen reactions to things, Occupy Wall Street, movements in other countries, Arab Spring. A lot of that hasn't actually gelled into a new politics. I think the internet's actually, it's good at the flash mob. It's bad at the manifesto and the platform and the political party. And I think and also the terrorism group, right? Like Europe, speaking of Europe, in the 70s and 80s had also the Baader-Meinhof gang, the Red Brigades, like all sorts of terrorist groups. ETA in Spain were active and following a political philosophy and willing to kill or die or get thrown in jail for it. And now you just don't see that, right? Like, oh, you have a Twitter spat about it, but like nothing happens really.
Except in Israel.
Well, because Israel, right. The West is living in the post-history. Israel's actually living in history. Israel is living a totally different movie. And again, it's hard to explain if you haven't been there, but they're living in a different reality than we are. And I think part of the reason why we can't understand it is it's hard to understand that reality unless you kind of see it for yourself. That's right. Yeah. They're living in a very real reality. It's not a fake one. But
what do you think, Erik? Do you think phones are ruining us?
I think we're having a problem adjusting to it. I think it's it just takes some time to build the proper immunity. I think it's hard not to be compelled by some of the evidence around some of the mental health stuff. But I do think social media, because it's so new, is applied to a different standard. It's like fashion magazines ruin, young women too, right? But we're not like talking about banning fashion magazines or highly regulating fashion. Like there are lots of things about culture that sort of have negative effects on teenagers. Being a teenager is hard. School fucking sucks, right? School has negative effects on high school, prison for so many people. It just feels like social media, what do they call it? Like isolated demands of rigor. It feels like it has a different bar to prove itself because it's so new, yet we don't put that same bar on sort of other things about, modernity, basically, that are having negative effects. So yes, I think it has some negative effects, but I don't think it has unique negative effects. And I think we should evaluate it, accordingly.
Yeah. I mean, I think middle school and high school just sucks. Like it's extremely immature, tons of hormones flying around. And yeah, it's a new tool, and it's to Antonio's analogy, which I think is great. It's like we've moved from knives to guns, so it's even more potent. But at the same time, it's the same fundamental emotions, human behaviors. So maybe they're a little more exacerbated, but those things existed prior to phones.
Yeah,
right?
And on the democracy side, which is where a lot of people really have a problem with it, is its enabling of Trump and all these people like Ben Shapiro and all these people. Is like there's this great interview Dan, that you showed me like 5 years ago with Steve Bannon and where is he, like Oxford or something? And
it's Frontline.
No, sorry, but there's another one. There's another one where he goes to Oxford and it's Q&A with some kids, some students in Oxford, and someone's like, "How do you feel about being complicit to destroying democracy or whatever?" And he says, "How did I destroy democracy? More people voted than ever. Like it's more of democracy than ever." He's like, and the student goes, "Well, democracy isn't people voting, or there's more to, like, or that's not all that's democracy. It's like these institutions that set norms. And he's like, wait, so you're saying it's not people voting, it's actually being told what to do? That's democracy. And I feel like that's what people are complaining about, is social media gives people a voice. Although what they would say is that it brainwashes people, which I don't sympathize. Like, maybe they're brainwashed. I don't see why social media brainwashes more people than the New York Times brainwashes people or something.
Well, I think Curtis has the best line here, right? It's politics when it's the people you don't like doing it, but it's democracy when it's your team doing it,
Yeah.
right? So it's the same fucking thing. But
well, we're at time here. Shall we wrap on this, or any?
Yeah.
Antonio, great to have you back. Another banger. And
okay. All right. See you guys.